Hello and welcome to episode 19 of the Bell Falls Search Focus on Talent video series. Today's guest has built a career in human resources, talent management, and recruiting in both the corporate and entrepreneurial settings. He amassed nearly 20 years of experience in the banking industry before moving on to the consulting world. And over the last few years, he has built a very successful software as a service business, which aims to solve one of the most critical challenges in recruiting. Very excited to introduce Ron Bauer, founder and president of the Brickpath Group, a human resources advisory and consulting firm, and the InterviewPath, a SaaS solution to generate custom interview guides. Ron, thanks a lot for being here.
Thanks for having me. At the risk of dating myself a little bit, 27 years in banking. You were being nice there just to not punch me out. So I do appreciate that.
So thanks for clarifying that. Appreciate it. Ron, as I ask everybody, right, for my audience, talk about your career progression and how you moved from the banking industry into starting your own consulting firm and then into the SaaS business. So you have a fascinating journey, and I can't wait to share it. So we'll start there.
So coming out of college, I took a job in a rotational management training program in a bank. I was a communications major, not an accounting or finance major, so I was a little different for that profile, very different actually. And so I started working in banking, went around and learned a lot of different aspects of the bank. About a year into that, I landed a job working on the bank operations side, bank operations, bank technology, where I then spent really the next 10 years of my career was really behind the scenes, managing lots of people, projects, process improvements, acquisitions, and loved all that. I then made the move into HR. I spent the next 17 years there in a couple of different banks. I didn't really work in the bank. It was all behind the scenes, staff kinds of positions. It was never my aspiration to say I want to spend all my career in banking, but it worked out. It's where my network was. It's where the opportunities were for me at that point. So I just followed that. So into the HR part, if we jump ahead to the very end of that, what became the end of the corporate part, I was working for an organization that in the banking crisis of a few years ago was failing and eventually failed and was taken over by the FDIC and sold. And it was during that year or so that I really started to explore okay, what am I going to do next? And it became very clear to me as I was doing a lot of research and, to be fair, some interviewing during that time that I just really didn't want to work for someone else again. I had this, like many do, a burning an itch that just said, I want to go explore this on my own. I didn't know what that meant, but that led to me creating a consulting practice now almost 14 years ago. It'll be 14 years in February that I started. So at its core was driven off of, I don't want to go find another job. I've done it. I've proven what I felt like I needed to prove for me, and it was time to go prove something different for me.
In the run of banking experiences you've had, was it coincidence that you ended up working for 3 banks in a row, or were you recruited?
It's probably a little bit of both, but as I made those moves, it was more about the HR experience I brought and my background more so than that I knew a bunch about banking. Now, I learned a ton about banking after that many years. I don't really believe it was based on that. I believe that it was more on the people side, the leadership, the HR piece, and my network. My network happened to be in that space, and I knew people, and I went to meetings. I was involved in industry organizations, so that just admittedly made that part easier.
I hear what you're saying on the consulting side. Same thing for me. That's why I went out and finally started my own thing and wanted to be my own boss. But curious, when you started, I'm sure you had a predisposition on the services you were going to offer and how those were going to work. How did that play out in reality, and how has that evolved over the years?
Yeah, great question. So when I first started my consulting practice, I was very focused on really what I'd call one broad topic. And what I wanted to do was build this business around recruiting strategy and recruiting effectiveness, helping people do recruiting better. I had spent the end of the last 2 corporate jobs I had in the last 2 organizations I was in, those jobs were predominantly leading, turning around, fixing, improving recruiting functions. I fell in love with that space, and I didn't feel like that there was anybody really talking about that on a local regional basis here in and around Cleveland. And so like that's what I wanted to do. That's my differentiator. That's how I'll go make a name for myself. I love this space. I have a lot of passion, energy around this space. And here's what I found out. Everybody wanted to talk about that. But in 2010 and 11, 12, no one wanted to pay for it. That really then led to, and even though over the years I've done a fair amount of work in that space, but it wasn't in the very beginning. What that then meant is I had to step back. I won't even say pivot because it never really took off from that perspective. It was where else can I make an impact? And oh, by the way, what will people pay for? So what I quickly started to figure out, first piece was executive coaching. I had a fair amount of internal coaching background. I had a lot of people calling me about, would you be an executive coach? Would you come in and do this? It really started around the executive coaching side. And then probably about 9 months in, towards the end of the first year that I had my business, people started calling me about doing recruiting. And I had very specifically said, I don't want to be a recruiter. I don't want to be third-party search. I've dealt with it on the other side. I don't like those people. It's a slimy business. I don't want to be part of it. So I took a really strong stand for about 10 months until I needed to eat. And then somebody called and I made a deal with somebody that I'd known for years. And she called and said, hey, I have 2 searches I need you to do. They were both in the HR space. She was building out a team as a new HR director. She wanted me to come in and help her fill these 2 jobs. And I said, happy to do it. Just don't tell anybody because I don't want to be a recruiter, but I'll do it for you as a favor. And oh, by the way, I got paid. Then somebody else did the same thing a couple months later, unrelated to that person. I said, same thing. Don't tell anybody. I would now describe in retrospect, I was a reluctant recruiter for the first 2 years of my business. I didn't want to do it. It pays well when you do it well. And then what I figured out during that time, kind of the important part of that story, really led into, I figured out that there was a way to do recruiting, do executive search, kind of above board, not be slimy. I don't know what the right word is for that, but is to do it and just do it in a way that as if I were inside the organization, right? It was treating candidates that way, treating the organization that way. I just, for me, if you do contingent search, it felt that was not going to fit well for what I wanted to do. I want to go do this. I want to do it well, creating a fee structure that felt good to people. And I just figured out that I could do recruiting in a way that I felt not only good about, but really proud of, and that I could build on. So that's where, that was that evolution from that standpoint. Now, doing that work then led back to, in some cases, helping people do recruiting better. Because my whole pitch around that was, hey, if I can help you do recruiting better, you don't have to pay for a search firm. You don't have to go pay fees, right? I can help strategy, help you build your team, build their knowledge and expertise and how to do their job. So I started doing that as well. The executive coaching business continued to build, and it still does today. That executive coaching business really then led into many of those clients not only wanted me to work with some of their direct reports as I was working with them, but it was also, hey, could you turn some of what we're talking about into basically into leadership training? Could you get in front of 20, 30 leaders and deliver some of these same messages, which then evolved into me taking on a pretty strong practice around leadership training, which I had never done in a corporate world. I had trained more technical training on a couple of things. I didn't really do a lot of training in my corporate life, but just evolved out of this. And one of those lessons, right? And you were in some ways, I don't know, necessarily alluding to it in the way that you set the question up, but just in that evolution, right? At some level, you may have something you want to do as an entrepreneur. The market will tell you what they want. And then you decide what part of it you want. I had a whole list of things I could do for my corporate HR life, a whole list of things I never wanted to do, and I still haven't. There's just areas that were never of interest, or necessarily expertise either, that I just stayed out of. So it is that evolution that just says, listen to the market will tell you what they want, and then you just decide if you want to do it or not.
That was an absolutely loaded question, and you nailed it spot on, even though we didn't practice that. Because I was hoping that would be your answer. That's how I learned from some of my mentors that I watched startup businesses. Kind of learned it on my own, the hard way over the last 8 years. But I still run into people who say, I'm going to do this, and this is what I'm going to do. And they don't waver I'd say 1 out of maybe 20 times it works that way, but mostly it doesn't. And I always ask people, what do you want to do and what will you do? And the what will you do is something you really got to think about and pay attention to. And sometimes you just have to do it.
So it's
So
funny you say that. I literally just had lunch with someone today. And this was the conversation as they were debating whether they wanted to go down this path or not from a consulting and somebody in the HR space. And they had a lane, like I want to do this. And I said, great. And that's all part of, being entrepreneurial and just figuring out and rolling with the punches. And oh, by the way, maybe along the way, as I did, found out some things I wasn't necessarily part of my plan that I absolutely love doing. Like I'm very deliberate. I don't do work that I don't love doing. There is nothing. I spend most of my time doing work that I don't want to be part of. Or by the way, with people I don't want to. It's a pretty cool opportunity when you can do all that.
I'm very lucky that I get the chance to do this with you today, though. So appreciate it. While we're on this path, I guess I shouldn't use that word, no pun intended. Let's talk about InterviewPath. When did that start? How did you start it? And where are we at in that evolution?
So backing up, there were a couple of things. I'm always trying to be a better business owner and learn from other people and read and listen to podcasts and talk to people who've been doing it maybe differently or longer, or sometimes not even longer, but just differently than I am. Try to learn from them. Early on, one of the lessons that I heard from someone was, Ron, if you're ever going to create the life that you say you want, you need to figure out how to make money while you're asleep. Because if you're only making money for the hours that you work, you're going to run out of an upside potential from a revenue perspective. And that made a lot of sense. And every year when I would do strategic planning for my business, that was on there. Figure out how to make money while I'm asleep. And I had some ideas. I played around with it for a couple of years. So there's that track of the story, and I'm going to connect some of these things together. Another part of it, as I was doing some work in that recruiting strategy and recruiting effectiveness place, one of the things that I 100% of the time came across was I would be talking to people about kind of current state of recruiting, interviewing, selection, kind of all aspects of it. Very few exceptions. People would come back and usually they would lean forward and whisper with some version of, we're not very good at interviewing. I don't know, and this is like an HR person as an example. I don't know what our managers are asking. I don't know if they're asking good questions. I don't know if they're asking illegal questions. And I lose sleep over that. So at that point, early on, I said, oh, there's this software. And I pointed them to some really big national level companies that had been around for years that I had been exposed to in some of the bigger organizations I worked in. And I would point people to that and say, oh, you need to go look at this because this software will simplify your life. It's going to create a good framework for a custom interview guide. You can identify the competencies you want. It'll tell you the questions to ask and not ask. And here's what happened every single time I did that. They would come back a couple weeks later. Hey, I looked at those companies that you mentioned, and a couple of things. I understand why you suggested that. Good idea. Here's the reality. Their software is not that easy to use. It's clunky, and it's ridiculously expensive, really expensive. That maybe a really big organization, 10, 20, 30,000 employee organization might pay for. But many of the people I was working with were noticeably smaller, and they're like, we're never going to spend that much money. So it took a little while, but I connected those dots together and said, oh, here's what I can do. I know what needs to be done. I've been a user of it. I've had to manually create interview guides before. It's painful. It's time consuming. It's brutal. What if I could create a software that solves some of the problems that I just heard from those folks? So I said, it's got to be easy to use, great user interface. Should be SaaS based. No one wanted something on their own computer systems. One of the other things I heard was just how inflexible some of these companies were, like in adding a competency, adjusting the competency, adding interview questions. And the answer was just always no. So I wanted that to be part of the framework, and I wanted it to be really affordable. And the flip side, I actually have used the language around it. I want it to be ridiculously affordable, just complete opposite of what others were experiencing. So I did that. And initially it wasn't even a separate company. It was going to develop this product to be part of the Brickpath Group, my consulting practice. It'll be part of that. I learned very quickly as I started figuring out what this meant that it really needed to be a separate entity for lots of good legal and accounting reasons. I followed all that advice from really smart people who get paid to do those things. And I created a separate company, and I went out, I found a software developer. I found a friend who's PhD in IO Psych to help me develop the competency model, grabbed a room full of recruiters, and we created a bunch of interview questions that we thought people would ask. And then just literally as I went, figured out how to start a software company, which doesn't sound like the right way to go about it. It sounds like you probably know that before you start. But I literally just figured it out as I went and just kept building. That was the beginning of the whole thing, was connecting all that together.
That's an excellent story. I appreciate that. And I do want to expand a little bit about on the last thing you said, the keep building part. So you and I have been talking about InterviewPath for a few years now, and I've seen the demo in a few different states. And the last time I saw it, it blew me away the first time, but it was even significantly more advanced than the last time, just a couple of months ago. Again, another loaded question, but can you talk a little bit about the continuously building part and how you get through that? When is it done? Is it ever done?
I don't think anything is ever done. My whole life and career has been built around a core belief that everything can be better tomorrow than it is today. That's not a dissatisfaction or saying that things are bad today. I happen to believe that everything can be better, whether it's me as a business owner, as a father, grandfather, partner. I'm in a never-ending mode of improvement, is at least a goal. From a business perspective, what that meant was the right idea is you create a minimum viable product, MVP. And I didn't even know that language when I started. What I figured out backwards was I mapped out for a software development team what my vision was, and they came back and told me how much it was going to cost to do that. And I said, I can't afford that right now. What if we cut it back to, I created minimum viable product, didn't realize that's what it was at the time, which is, it's a product that will do the core of what you want it to do, and maybe there's one bell and one whistle, but that's it. And you stop there. And then you go figure out whether people are going to buy it or not. And so that's what I did. So I went out, built it, started talking to people, started doing demos literally on a laptop in Panera, just having conversations with people, started buying it. And then it was a combination of listening to people. And there was my own vision of, like, there's still a lot more I want to do with this business and with this product. But as money came in, literally every penny that came into the business for the first several years, every dollar that came in went right back into the business. Add more functionality to software, build more marketing, add more competencies, add more interview questions. And it was just a cycle that just continued. And it really still continues today, that we have a product roadmap that it's potentially years ahead of us, and we just continue that cycle of build it, grow it, listen, react, add some new functionality based on what people are asking for, which has been a blast. And I love spending my time in that space, just figuring out what that is and what's next. That makes my eyes light up every day.
As I mentioned, I've seen it. I haven't necessarily used it, but I strongly believe it's a very compelling product, and any company that isn't using it should, especially from a interviewing process standpoint, because you and I both know that's a pretty big weakness for most companies of any size.
If I think about just some of that evolution, and even as the product has evolved, like in the beginning, it was very much about, this mission that said, I can help you improve your quality of hire. I believe there's one good measure in recruiting. There's only one measure that matters in recruiting. It's quality of hire. I don't care how fast you fill a job, and what your time to fill is. I can fill jobs with crappy people really fast. That's been the way I looked at it. So I've been a big believer in quality of hire, and which is how long do people stay? How well do they perform? How long do they stay? That to me is what matters. And I believe that InterviewPath was going to be part of that solution, right? Ask better questions, get better results. Ask the questions that are aligned with the job, your culture, but like what you aspire to be. Number two, I knew enough from the other side and make the life easier, simple, more impactful for a recruiting teams, so that they weren't spending their time trying to make up questions or track down managers' responses, any of that. Just simplify their life. There's clearly a compliance part, depending on the organization, that's a big win. It's never been the driving force. It's always on their radar. And it's always been very much about how do we create a great candidate experience. We wanted this tool to ask good questions, meaningful questions, thought-provoking questions that get to the core of who you might be as a candidate, how well you might fit in the organization, how well aligned are you with our culture. and that you enjoyed the interview. If you walk into 5 interviews in a company, as you walk around 5 different conference rooms, and every room somebody asks you the same exact question, there's a problem. That's just a horrible experience. That was the initial goal. And the really cool thing, and we've also figured out that we can help people do, is actually define their culture that they want and what they want to aspire, what they aspire to in their culture, and then provide them the core competencies that support that. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what that means. People say all the time, we want a culture of trust and we want a culture of accountability. I say, great. I can train you on that all day long, but if you really want a culture of accountability, hire people who are accountable. It's an overly simplified example, and it works. It's way easier just to hire people who can effectively answer a question about a time they made a mistake at work. What did they learn? What did they do differently? We all have made mistakes. Were you accountable? Were you not? So doing that, or helping people that are trying to drive what we refer to as cultural intelligence. Can you work well with people who don't look like you, sound like you, talk like you, are from where you came from, went to school where you did, drive what you drive, all of that. A year or two ago, we were working with somebody and they were all in on buying InterviewPath. And through those conversations, they came back and said, oh, by the way, we have this initiative. This was a manufacturing organization that was growing quickly through acquisitions all over the country. And they had a phrase that they were trying to drive, an enterprise mindset. They wanted people to do their jobs at any level in the organization. They wanted people to do their job broadly, not just about what was right for their job, their department, their division, their city, state, whatever. So they had this idea around enterprise mindset, and we really don't have a competency around that, but we'll go create one. And we've done that a number of times. We've added 25 competencies since the first release of the product, where we had 45, 49 competencies when we first started. And we just continue to add them. And that was when we literally started from scratch. And we said, okay, what does that mean? Let's create a definition. What does it look like to be great at that? What's it look like to be does not meet on that? Let's go create 30, 40, 50 interview questions about that somebody could ask to figure out where people could give examples where they've made decisions that were in the best interest of an organization, not just their own department, as a simple example of that. So that's been a really cool evolution of the product, is beyond just helping people with the interview. It's really helping people drive and create a culture that they want. That's been a blast.
And that's something also that AI and ChatGPT can't actually do either. They might be able to generate a bunch of interview questions, but not tie it back to the culture and create a cohesive plan. So thank you for that. That was fascinating. And I love that story. Could we switch gears a little bit to tapping into more of your talent experience? Same questions I always ask all my guests. For students thinking about going to college, or students in college thinking about heading out to the workforce, what advice would you give them on, I guess, what opportunities exist in the market, how the market's changing, what things should they focus on while they're in school?
Yeah, so I'm gonna so at a starting point, right? It's funny. It's when we were talking before about how businesses evolve, and people are sometimes surprised. It's like college majors are the same. The number of people you've ever talked to, oh, what major did you start with? What major did you end with? And then what happened to your career? Rarely. Now, so a couple of things that I would tell somebody who was in school: start with something, and whether it's accounting, IT, I don't care what your kind of core, like technical skill, let's call it, whatever that may look like. Whatever that core thing is, make sure along the way, take as many classes and get as much experience you can in around communications, being able to communicate with people in writing, verbally, leading meetings. Take classes wherever you are, learn how to do public speaking, learn how to run a small group of people. You're just always going to need communication skill. The other that I think might not be as obvious, and maybe it's somewhat related, but there's a number of schools, and I have a bias for Ohio University, where I went to school. They happen to have this fantastic, but basically they had this curriculum. It was a program that was developed. They had some big individual sponsors that were alumni, I believe, and then a number of corporate sponsors that said, we need people to come out of school with sales skills. I don't care whether they're a math major, IT major, HR major, I don't care what their major is. People need sales skills. And what does that mean? To me, that's just influence. And they created great internships and they created great curriculum and a program to the point it ended up with a designation on your diploma, even though it wasn't a major. But I recruited out of those programs. The other more broadly today, which clearly is evolving right in front of us and right around us, is I don't care what your background is, you better understand how AI impacts it, right? So whatever either direct education you can get or whatever self-taught learning you want to do, you need to understand how AI fits in, how it's going to impact your life, your career, and what's going on. It's not going away. It's going to get bigger, faster, smarter, not without some concerns. I'll give you that. That's a whole other podcast probably. But you better know what's going on. I think, and that becomes a way to differentiate yourself as well.
Those are 3 of the 5 things I told my son he better focus on when he goes to college. So I'm going to make him watch this and tell him it's not just me. So then, and then similarly for experienced talent, right? You've interviewed a lot of people in your career, like I have, and we're in a weird market right now. As you and I were talking about, supply and demand has changed. Unemployment is supposedly low, but there's still a lot of jobs open. What would you tell somebody who's experienced, doesn't matter if they're an accountant or a software developer or a marketer, how to go about that job search, how to differentiate themselves in the interview process, and maybe even if you have an anecdote or two that was memorable, potentially share that.
Where candidates used to complain about getting ghosted by recruiters, now recruiters are getting ghosted by candidates, and some amount of that might be payback, but the reality, like in today's world, as sadly as it is, I think it's a differentiator to follow up, follow through, and just be honest with people. If you're not interested in a job, say so. If you'd rather them talk to somebody else, just say so. Just be honest. Don't just ghost people, because here's the reality. Recruiters know each other. They compare notes. They talk to each other. And wherever you are listening or watching this, you're in a small town. I don't care where you are. It's not a 6 degree of separation world anymore. It's 2 to maybe 3. Your reputation's going to get out there. Maybe it's easy. People are always trying to figure out how to present themselves, and in the end, like, to me, it's just it's simple advice, but sometimes missed. Like, just be you. Whoever you are, just be you. That's really easy to do. You don't have to prepare for that. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to think about. Just be you. Be honest. Be transparent. I think being able to differentiate yourself with your business savvy, not just your technical savvy and whatever it is you do. It's that broader understanding of business and how it works. That to me is a differentiator for most people, is that you absolutely have to understand that. And the other thing, absolutely, I'm going to throw in there is, especially as a leader, you better understand AI and what its impact is on your job, on your function, on your industry. And you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be able to write chat GPT prompts. I'd recommend you go play with it and try it and understand how easy it might be, either as an employer or as a parent. You better understand what it's doing, because it's going to catch up with us fast. Literally to the point just where this is part of the evolution of InterviewPath. I don't believe that AI is a competency. It's a technical skill, yes. But we've started building interview questions into many of our competencies that are specific to AI as it relates to change or leadership or resilience or learning or just a number of different things, because our customers are asking for it. They're starting to interview for that.
Ron, this has been excellent chat. I really appreciate your time. There's a lot of great knowledge you shared, and I can't wait to share. So thanks again. I'm glad we were able to make this happen.
Great. Thanks. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, and see you soon.
All right. See you soon. Take care.